I'll introduce myself in a second, but just for anybody who joined late, this is a talk on insomnia, of course, dangers of the sleepless hero, and a lot of people could benefit from this talk, I'm sure. Quite a hot topic. So if you don't know me, if you haven't attended it in my talks before, just a quick introduction. My name is Thalia Charney. I'm the Nutrition and Health Education Manager for Now Foods Canada, which is a very big supplement company. I'll introduce them as well. I'm a holistic nutrition and wellness coach. I have a very long background of 30 years, having dabbled in many things from fitness trainer, personal trainer, learned herbs, essential oils, nutrition, etc. Also an author, and most important for me is I really try to keep my trainings honest, objective, nuanced, and with some humility. So I hope you enjoy it. As with every talk, of course, a little disclaimer that this presentation is for informational purposes only, so it does not constitute the practice of medicine. And any information written or stated here, materials linked, or just even the answers to your questions at the end are at the user's own risk. In general, a good idea, if you want to know the proper uses of supplements or essential oils or anything that I talked to you about tonight, then you can always access them on our website. There's going to be a lot of details before I get to those, a lot of good practical tips, so I think you're going to like it. Just a few important reminders for tonight. One is that I will answer questions at the end just to keep the flow going. Secondly, if you want to chat with one another, that's where the chat bubble is great, so go ahead, go crazy, exchange ideas, have fun. But if you want to ask me personally a question, please write those questions in the Q&A bubble instead. That is where I'm going to look at the end. And in answer to the question of, is this being recorded? Yes, and you will get a copy emailed to you. So you can get to watch it again and again as much as you like. It's also posted on the Healthy Planet YouTube channel permanently. So a little bit about Now Foods. We are a family-owned company. We celebrated 50 years a couple years ago. So that is highly unusual for a company to be around this long, and it's because of our great reputation, our integrity, and the quality that we've had for so many years. We are most well known for being obsessed about our quality. We have 8 labs. We have a huge staff dedicated to quality, and we do an average of 16,000 quality tests on a monthly basis in our labs. Getting my little laser pointer here. And we have a huge staff, 150 to 200 people dedicated to all things quality. We actually are a 2-time industry manufacturer of the year honoree. And our manufacturing is, we're so well known for our standards that we've been studied by Fortune 500 companies looking to how to improve their own capabilities. And we have many desirable certifications that are important to you, I'm sure, and also to us. All right, so let's jump into the meat of All About Sleep. I'm going to read this very sensational quote about a cure-all. Scientists have discovered a revolutionary new treatment that makes you live longer. It enhances your memory. It makes you more creative. It makes you look more attractive. It keeps you slim. It lowers your food cravings. It protects you from cancer and dementia. It wards off colds and flus. It lowers your risk of heart attack and stroke, not to mention diabetes. You'll even feel happier, less depressed, and less anxious. Are you interested? My gosh, this sounds like too good to be true to anybody. But this is a quote from the book Why We Sleep, which is written by, I'd say, one of the world experts on sleep, Matthew Walker. So I think in one way, if you ever read this, and it's very academic and a lot of details, you will probably agree with the statement, even though it sounds so sensational. Now, all living creatures sleep, so there must be something about it that's important, and it's a very adaptive thing, and we've studied it so much, but we're still trying to figure it out. This is our brain waves when we're awake, And this is actually our brain waves when we're in that dream, what we call dream sleep, the rapid eye movement sleep. It looks very similar, only at this time, our body is almost completely paralyzed, and it's definitely not the same. But we also have another type of sleep called non-REM sleep, and you can see it looks very different. So sleep and awake are definitely not the same thing. Now there's a little bit of background. There's different stages of sleep. You've probably heard of REM sleep. Again, that's that dream sleep, and non-REM sleep. And we cycle through these different stages of sleep about every 90 minutes, approximately. And one of the interesting things that you'll see here is that in the early part of the night, our brain consumes, or we consume more of that non-REM sleep. We're in that stage more often than not. But in the early morning, we consume more of that REM dream sleep. So our body is going into those different phases. That means that if you're being woken up very early in the morning, 4 or 5, you get up very early and you're not getting full night's sleep, you're depriving yourself of the REM sleep. Whereas if you go to bed really late, you're depriving yourself of the non-REM. So that kind of has consequences in terms of when you go to sleep. And studies show that our body tries to catch up on the different types of sleep if we deprive them. So they're both important and seem to be different. And again, we have a lot more to know, but non-REM sleep is important for memory transfer, taking the memories from that short-term bank and putting them into a safer long-term storage. And REM sleep is important for integrating those memories and creativity and emotional IQ and many other things. So what if Mendeleev had been deprived of his REM sleep? Perhaps he would not have come up with a periodic table, which he says came to him in a dream. And perhaps we also wouldn't have Paul McCartney's beautiful song Yesterday, which he said came to him in a dream. Now, an important part of sleeping, and I'm going to give some practical tips on this, is understanding the circadian rhythm. So in our body, in our brain, we actually have a clock, and it has a circadian rhythm, just like the day and night, there's a rhythm. That is about 24 hours and 15 minutes where we rotate through different cycles in our body with this clock. And the way this was discovered is by these 2 amazing men who spent 32 days in complete darkness in a cave. And what they found is that even without any sunlight at all, they still were awake and asleep within this 24-hour and 15-minute period. Now, if we didn't have any sunlight, we would get out of sync from the sun, because 24 hours and 15 minutes isn't quite 24 hours, which is the sun. So our body is so clever, and we use the sun to fine-tune this clock that we have. Hi guys, I just got a text. I was making sure it wasn't something about a technical issue, and it's good. So we have the sun, and it tunes this clock to the 24-hour period. So that's really important to keep us in sync. It's the sunlight, sun and dark cycle outside is the most important and powerful effect on this big clock. But actually, we have clocks in all of our organs and in every cell of our body. And these clocks turn on and off thousands of our genes on a daily basis. So we are actually cycling through different things all the time. Our hormones, our energy, when we feel like eating, all these things, when we digest best, are on a rhythm, on a clock. Temperature also affects that. When we eat also affects our circadian rhythm, and when we are active, say exercising, what we're doing. So by understanding these things, we can use these things to get our clock in a good rhythm, because a good rhythm, if your clock is in a good rhythm, ideally, then you're sleeping well, your mood is good, and life in general and your health is good. There are many ways that we disrupt this circadian rhythm. So jet lag is one that you obviously would know of, and shift work, because with these, we are not in sync with our normal routine. So the body loves routine. That keeps us in sync. But for many people, what we don't think of is we have social jet lag. So we stay out on the weekend and we party, or we intentionally sleep in on the weekend. This disrupts the natural rhythm. Body wants you to wake up and go to sleep at the same time every day. Just changing routines, eating at different times, seasonal changes, putting the clock forward and back, all of these things disrupt our circadian rhythm, and we have to work to keep it in the right rhythm. So now what you're looking at here is there's two things that affect when you feel awake, or primary things, and when you feel sleepy. One I've already mentioned is our circadian rhythm. It naturally goes up and down, even without sunlight, but the sunlight helps a lot. And you can tell you have the circadian rhythm because even if you, and don't try this, but if you were to stay up for 2 whole days straight, you would think you would just keep getting more and more and more and more tired, but you don't. You get very tired, but then you have peaks where you feel a little bit more awake and then tired again, a little bit more awake, because that circadian rhythm is still going even though you haven't slept. There's another thing that affects our sleepiness, and this is a hormone called adenosine. And what adenosine does, from the time you wake up to the time you go to sleep, it builds up the sleep pressure in your brain. And so the pressure gets more and more and more to go to sleep. And hopefully by the time you're in the evening, the pressure's at its highest, and this is going to make you want to fall asleep. But there are certain habits that can reduce that buildup of pressure. One, going to sleep in the middle of the day can kind of diffuse. It's like letting the air out of the balloon, that pressure a bit. And coffee, which I will get to. So just remember that, sleep pressure. Now there are people who, many people who kind of, almost, this is in our culture, feel like they're heroes for not sleeping. And I'll sleep when I'm dead. We've heard that. But here are 3 people: Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, and Dr. William Halsted, who's the founder of the surgical training program at Johns Hopkins. He's long gone. All 3 of them slept less than 5 hours a night. And Ronald Reagan got dementia. Margaret Thatcher got dementia. We're not sure if that was the reason, but it could be. And, I shudder at the thought of any intern in a hospital doing surgery on me or treating me after 28 hours or whatever it is, where they haven't slept. But this terrible idea was instituted by Dr. William Halsted. And the reason that he was able to subsist on so little sleep is apparently he was a cocaine addict. So interesting factoid. But Einstein slept 10 hours, so maybe we should model ourselves after him. Why do we sleep? I'm not going to go into too much detail tonight, but there's lots of evidence that there's many good reasons we evolved to sleep. One of them that's been of recent interest in the last few years is that when we're in a certain stage of sleep at night, our brain starts to repair and detox. And so that's very important to get good sleep, just so that our brain can stay healthy. There are many other things going on. Sleep is considered so important that the Guinness Book of World Records actually banned the act of depriving oneself of sleep as a part of to get into the Guinness Book World of Records, because they thought that's so dangerous. But they will still allow this guy, Felix, to free fall from a hot air balloon at 1,000 kilometers an hour at the surface of the Earth, breaking the sound barrier. So they consider sleep deprivation more dangerous than what he did. It says something. I'm just going to have a few sips of water here because when I don't have my mic on, it gets very tough to shout. All right. So how much sleep do we need? Most experts agree 8 to 9 hours a night is ideal, but it does depend on who you are and probably genes and what age you are, of course. But it is telling that 100 years ago, less than 2% of people slept 6 hours or less, and today about 30% of people sleep 6 hours or less. So that is a huge shift. What's going on? In terms of when should we sleep, Well, that does differ a little bit, so we can't be 100% strict. For example, teenagers naturally stay up later and sleep in later. We do change our sleeping and our circadian rhythm as we cycle through life. And of course, infants are born with very wonky circadian rhythms that take quite a while. The elderly seniors naturally are supposed to fall asleep sooner. That's the early bird special. And there are believed to be different chronotypes, people that are owls and people that are larks. They're naturally, great staying up at night, or that person that you can't stand that's all chipper in the morning and you're not. So, we have different types. In terms of the idea of napping, there is certainly good evidence to show that napping can be helpful. This very large Harvard study took 23,000 adults from Greece that had been doing their siesta and had them abandon it as a study, and there was a 37% increased risk of death from heart disease over 6 years as compared to the placebo group who didn't abandon it. So that says a lot. Naps, we know, short naps, like 20 minutes or a little more, can help consolidate your memory. So if you have just read a book or had an important meeting and then have a nap, you're more likely to remember things. So definitely advantages. But naps do break that sleep pressure I talked about that builds up in the brain. So napping for too long or too close to bedtime, or for those that are having trouble falling asleep in the first place, a nap can be disruptive. So for some people, it may be appropriate, for others not. Many people have issues with waking up in the middle of the night, and I'm 100% going to admit that this is harder to treat than falling asleep. But we need to first ask ourselves the question, or you need to see someone who can figure it out for you. Why are you waking up? Because there's many different reasons, which means there's many different ways to address it, and maybe there's layers. Stress is a huge one. Temperature fluctuations. So as I said, our temperature is on a circadian rhythm. If it gets too high in the middle of the night, it's not supposed to, and that's why a lot of women in menopause wake up. Having blood sugar maybe drop can wake you up. Having a weak bladder. One tip I've heard is that having a little bit of salt in your water at night might help for some people not waking up to go to the bathroom, because the salt helps you retain that water. Sleep apnea, definitely I would say do not assume just because you're maybe young or slim that you don't have sleep apnea. It is not only for people who are older or who are overweight. Acid reflux sometimes can wake people up at night and they don't know it. It's irritation in the throat. I'm going to talk about alcohol. Of course, noise, earplugs are a good solution, and we might wake up from pain. So there's different reasons, and those are not all of them. There are some studies, I'm just showing a couple, about how sleep affects our immune system, and this one is an interesting one. In the study, they actually, on purpose, administered the common cold virus up the noses of these healthy adults. And what they found was that there was a linear relationship between having less sleep and a higher rate of infection. So that is really interesting. And also, in response to a flu shot, so it's not a COVID vaccine, just to be clear, it's just a flu shot, but a group that was deprived of sleep produced a reduced effect from the vaccine. So when you get this flu shot, your body wants to mount a response. They mount these antibodies, and that was dampened by 50% for those who were sleep deprived. Which is why at least you want to get a good night's sleep the day before you're getting a vaccine. I guess that would be the message there. How do prescription drugs work? Now, I'm not an expert in the prescription drugs, and there are many, but by and large, prescription drugs do not induce a natural sleep. So that's an important thing to know. And as Matthew Walker says, in his opinion, not mine, there's no objective benefit beyond what placebo offers for prescription drugs, for most prescription drugs. This is not here me telling anyone to go off their medication, just to be clear, but I want to say that because it's an important note. Now, this is a great thing to hear. When the College of Physicians and surgeons looked at all the evidence for sleep. Now they're just looking at drugs, they're not looking at natural treatments per se. But what they said was that the best evidence is for cognitive behavioral therapy, and that should be the first line of treatment, meaning we should use that before we try drugs. And what all that is it's basically built on hygiene, basic sleep hygiene principles. How do we practice? And this is going to relate a lot to the circadian rhythm. So they're not saying that drugs are the best, they're saying that this is the best. Unfortunately, in my experience with my clients, it's very rare for doctors to use this as the first line of treatment, but you can perhaps in your area where you live search for a cognitive behavioral therapist for insomnia, CBTI, if you can find one. So I'm going to talk about sleep-wake hygiene principles. These are really important. These may not resolve every sleep issue, but they are core foundation for all of them. And for some people, definitely may resolve their sleep issues. So firstly, keeping a regular sleep-wake cycle as best as you can. Luckily, there are apps for that. So Sleep Cycle is just one example. It will tell you when to go to bed, when to wake up, and measure all kinds of other things. There's so many great apps. Secondly, with eating, try as best as you can to eat on a regular schedule and eat your last meal 2 to 4 hours before sleeping. Because if you eat late at night, that's telling your body that you're in a waking mode. That is not what your body needs. It's sending the wrong messages. Limit your exposure to sunlight after sundown, or to light. Of course, you won't have sunlight. Limit your exposure to any light in any way you can. I'll give you some tips. But on the opposite side, in the daytime, you want to get as much light in your eyes as you can. So that means do not wear blue blocking glasses in the daytime, which a lot of people do. Now, if it prevents you from getting headaches from the computer and the doctor's told you to do it, that's fine. There are some times where it can help, but it is those blue blocking glasses are meant for nighttime to reduce your exposure to light at the time when you shouldn't have it. But daytime, you want to have as much as you can. So if it means trying to get an office near a window, that would be of great value, just if you can't be outside all the time. And last tip, although you want to get as much sunlight in the daytime as you can, getting sunlight exposure, particularly at sunrise and sunset, can be of great value. And I go out every morning as soon as I wake up, walk, get some exposure to light, and then at sunset again. How long you need to stay out is really going to depend on how overcast it is or where you live, but at least try 10 minutes in the morning. If it's very overcast, if you can, half an hour. So when we are in our houses or wherever you live at night time, we're exposed to light, which is abnormal after the sun goes down. That's part of our industrialized world. This is what the sunlight spectrum looks like, the natural spectrum of light. But this is what our LED lights look like. So we went from, once upon a time just having a normal sun up, sun down. Then we invented fire, which didn't really disrupt that much because fire has a lot of red light, which is the least disruptive. We went to a lot of the blue spectrum of light, and our eyes were sensitive to, I see my internet connection's unstable. I'm just gonna, okay, sorry. I saw my internet connection was unstable, so I'm just gonna repeat that. So the LED lights have more blue light than other types of the older light bulbs, and that blue light is particularly disruptive to our sleep, and our eyes are very sensitive to it. And we're sensitive to all light at night, just to be clear. It's just the blue light is the worst. So you want to just reduce your exposure to light at night. So there are some hacks that you can use. Of course, there's all kinds. In fact, right now my screen is a very funny orange color, and that's because I have it set after sundown to not emit as much blue light. So whether it's on whatever device you're using, there are different many kinds of apps and programs to automatically reduce the blue light at night. But the best thing is just not to use them at night. Lights in the red spectrum, as I said, are less harmful. So if you get night lights that are kind of reddish orange in the red spectrum, that's better. Overhead lights are worse. So at nighttime, it hits a part of the light hits the part of the back of the eye where those cells that are sensitive to light are particularly concentrated. So if you have lights that are table lamps or even on the ground, if you have your lights, it's going to be much better than when it's coming from up above. This is a great mask. I find it, you want your room ideally to be pitch black at night, but with all my efforts, there's always some cracks. So I found a mask to be the best thing. And this particular one that I got, I love. It just works really well. So I'm not working for that company, not invested in it, just like it. So we love our coffee. I love my coffee. I still drink coffee. I have a decaf every day. We genetically react differently, but coffee does block those cells in your brain that normally this hormone adenosine would bind to increase that sleep pressure. So coffee does reduce that sleep pressure, and it lingers around a lot longer than most people realize. If you're having a coffee in the afternoon, there's no way it's out of your system by the time you go to bed, no matter who you are. But coffee certainly has its healthy, there are things about it, antioxidants and such. So if you can find a middle way, that'd be great. Alcohol, it's similar to what I said about some medications. It is a sedative. It will sedate you, but it is not a sleep aid. So alcohol actually will disrupt our sleep. It might help you fall asleep, absolutely. You have enough and you're out, but it will disrupt your sleep, and it can make you wake up many times a night. But there are sort of micro wakes. So you might not even be aware of the fact that you're waking up. You might just feel the next day really tired and not know why. So that's something about alcohol. So as a tip, if you really like alcohol, because that's in your culture, maybe try to have it before dinner instead of afterwards, where it's closer to sleep. Then, as I mentioned, one of the cues for our circadian rhythm is heat and cold. So naturally, of course, the sun goes down, it's cooler at night, and it's supposed to be that way, but we live indoors and everything is, is abnormal in terms of our temperature and our light. So turning the heat down to between 16 and 20 Celsius is considered ideal. Interesting tip, foam mattresses tend to trap heat, so they can cause you to really heat up at night, so they're not ideal versus a cotton mattress or some other type. All right, so now I'm going to talk about various kinds of supplements out there, starting with melatonin. So well known. So melatonin is really important for regulating our circadian rhythm. Like many things in our body, it fluctuates throughout the day according to the rhythm, and it peaks sometime after midnight. Ideally, it's supposed to start rising from sundown, but if we're exposed to a lot of light, we disrupt it. A lot of people think melatonin is a sleep aid, and it's not actually. What it does is it's kind of a starting signal, kind of like when people are going to run a marathon. On your mark, get set, go. That gun is the starting signal, and it sets a cascade of other things happening to get sleep properly in motion. One of my personal tips about melatonin is just, if you do use it, and I'm not here to tell anyone if you should or you shouldn't, or if it's best for you, you can ask your doctor, but if nobody has specifically told you to use a dose, use the smallest dose that you find helpful. And the reason I say that is because our bodies naturally produce less than 1 milligram naturally, a fraction of a milligram. And yet most supplements are well over, the 1 milligram, 3 milligrams, you'll see 5 milligrams and even higher. So I use melatonin not all the time, but I really like this one because it's drops, and 20 drops is 3 milligrams, which gives me a lot of control. So I will use 3 to 5 drops, which is less than a milligram. sometimes, just one drop. You can experiment. You want to find the lowest amount that seems to help. Probably take some experimenting. We know that melatonin helps with delayed onset sleep, so it can speed it up a bit. It may help with the length of sleep. Evidence is less strong. It certainly can help with jet lag to help reset your circadian rhythm to a new time zone more efficiently and faster. Also know that as you get older, we produce it less efficiently, so a half to a third of what a 10-year-old would. And that's the reason why there's more concrete studies showing it's helpful for the elderly than for other people. So it may be more appropriate. With jet lag, just a couple of things to tell you. So there has been, this is a summary of 10 trials on melatonin and jet lag. It will work the best when you are traveling across 2 to 4 time zones, and especially when you're traveling in the easterly direction. And that is because when you travel east, you have to go to bed earlier to adjust to the new time zone. And it's much harder to go to bed earlier than you normally would than to stay up later, which would be the case if you were traveling westward. So that's when it will work the best, but you will see for yourself how it works. Insomnia with stress or related to stress and anxiety, I would believe that is very common. And so don't always think in terms of what do you do to treat your insomnia about classically using classical like herbs related to sleep or known for sleep, because there are other ways of addressing this. So one of the things that has a rhythm in our body and our circadian cycle is something called cortisol. And cortisol is often just called our stress hormone. It's not the only one, but our cortisol is not meant to peak in the middle of the night. And if it does, it can wake you up. And cortisol can get out of whack if we are chronically stressed or even acutely stressed. So for chronic stress, there are certain supplements that may help to regulate that cortisol. Ashwagandha is one of those herbs that studies have shown that it can lower cortisol levels. Ashwagandha is in this formula as well. The super cortisol support has 4 herbs in it, but what all of these herbs have in common, or 4 adaptogen herbs, is that they have these herbs called adaptogens, and they're named because they help your body adapt better, or you to be able to handle better the ups and downs of life, including chronic stress. But that may help, but it's not something to take just one night. You take them for a while, and they, over some days or weeks will help to regulate your stress hormones a bit better. But then there's also acute stress. So you may be fine most of the time, but there's certain times when you're just feeling wired. And there's other herbs that are more helpful for that, such as kava kava. Kava kava is was a traditional drink, probably still is, in the South Pacific Islands, made differently there as a drink. And kava kava traditionally has been used for anxiety, nervousness, also known as an antispasmodic, so kind of muscle relaxant, and analgesic. Health Canada approves its use as something to help promote relaxation. This is reference to a randomized double-blind placebo study that showed kava kava helpful for sleep disturbances. It would reduce the latency, so the onset time it takes to fall asleep, improve deep sleep and cognitive function for those with ordinary anxiety, non-psychotic anxiety. That's what that means, just your run-of-the-mill anxiety like many of us have. Another study on kava kava showed it helpful for insomnia and also different symptoms of menopause. So anyone in menopause will know that can disrupt your sleep. This is an 8-week study. It's also thought to be helpful for a hyperactive bladder, because the bladder is a muscle, and it's a muscle relaxant. So it could be helpful for someone who's maybe waking up with that anxious bladder, if you want to call it. There's other traditional herbs as well I want to mention in a formula that I like. So passion flower, which is beautiful. Just looking at it makes me feel passionate about flowers for sure. It is traditionally used for restless and nervous insomnia, and also traditionally used for menopausal insomnia, or in traditional Chinese medicine, they call it a yin deficiency state when you're hot and dry. And it's also known as a gentle antispasmodic. So that's passion flower. And very similar in its properties is valerian. The valerian, which I would call it stinky herb, but don't worry, it's not going to make you stink. But if you ever take the actual root here and smell it, it's kind of like old socks. But it was known as the Valium of the 19th century. And I read about it recently. I read the Anne Frank's diary, very famous book, and she talked about how they would use valerian to help them relax and deal with stress. One tip around valerian is that it seems to be more effective after 2 weeks of continuous use. So sometimes people try something for a night or two and say, I don't think this works. Some herbs take a bit of time, and valerian can be one of those. Then there's hops. Hops, of course, you might think of beer. It's a very bitter traditional herb used as a sedative. It's been used by the Aboriginal Cherokees in Ayurvedic medicine from the East and traditional Chinese medicine as well. And the German Commission in Europe has approved its use for insomnia, especially with anxiety. And just notable, it's a natural source of plant estrogens. So that means that it could, in theory, be helpful for the menopause as well, where we have low estrogen disturbing our sleep. So this lovely formula here has those 3 herbs, valerian, hops, and passion flower that I just described. They're in a standardized extract, so that means that they are measuring and guaranteeing a certain amount of active ingredients. And it also has GABA. I'm going to describe GABA to you shortly, but GABA is an amino acid, or amino acid is kind of like a building block for proteins. So what I like about a formula like this, when I'm looking for a formula for sleep, sometimes the synergy of a few herbs can work better than a single herb, definitely. But in other cases, sometimes I see formulas that have so many herbs in them, which I suppose is meant to look impressive, but then you just dilute the effect. You do need a certain amount of oomph, a certain dose for each herb to be effective. So you can't just, put in 17 herbs. So I like that these are all, they're all a good dose, an effective dose, but still the synergy. I also like that there's no melatonin in this. And the reason is because I do use melatonin, but I like to be selective about when I use melatonin and why I'm using it. And so I don't want to have to use it in my sleep formula. So on a night like tonight, because I'm training, I'm staring at a screen for an hour here before I go to bed. I have a light on my face so that you can see me better. This is not good for my sleep. Tonight I will take melatonin because I know I'm disrupting its production. So some sleep formulas or ingredients might work on this pathway in our brain called the GABA pathway. And I'm going to explain some of those herbs. Now, this is a very simplistic look at the GABA pathway for those of you that are aficionados or interested in a bit of the details. So this glutamate converts to GABA. GABA is a very primitive brain chemical that has a kind of very subduing, relaxing, kind of, down effect on our brain. And glycine is another similar chemical in our brain that has a similar effect, but maybe not as strong. And in order to convert this glutamate to GABA, we require enough magnesium and vitamin B6. There are other things for sure. This is a simplified look, which is why some people may respond very well to taking magnesium before they go to sleep, because it could help with this pathway. But magnesium bisglycinate is a particular kind of magnesium, and glycinate, which it's attached to, is pretty much what glycine is here in the pathway. So it may also have its own effect separate from the magnesium. But there are also, this would be a more specialized magnesium. It's called magtine. This is a trademark name, or magnesium L-threonate. This is the only magnesium that has been shown to cross the blood-brain barrier. And I have found for some people who don't respond to other magnesiums that they do respond to this one. So if you're someone who's tried magnesium and hasn't worked, you could consider trying magtine. Now here's an interesting formula called True Calm. And this formula, I say, is kind of a comprehensive formula supporting that GABA pathway. So it actually has GABA in it. It also has glycine, which I mentioned here, acts similarly to GABA. Taurine is another substance. It's also called an amino acid, like a kind of protein building block. Taurine is thought to attract GABA to the receptors in the brain where it needs to provide its action. We've got vitamin B3, valerian. These are a few other just supporters. Valerian, which I've already mentioned, and we have magnesium in here, and B6. So magnesium and B6 that help with the conversion. So it's kind of a fulsome formula to support the GABA pathway, and that is another a great kind of formula. GABA, by the way, is for most people is not sedating, it's calming. So yeah, people can usually take GABA even in the middle of the day without feeling sleepy. And lastly, just a little bit on essential oils, because I didn't focus tonight on children, which is kind of a very different whole area, and I'm not a specialist in children and sleep, but I wanted to say something. Giving kids a gentle push to go to sleep. I love this. It's called Sleepy Puppy. This is a diffuser. I have a diffuser going behind me there. You can see it. Oh, I actually just realized I don't have my light on. I'll be sitting in the dark here the whole time, you guys. Sorry about that. But I have a diffuser in the background. So this is one for kids. It plays some soft music and it projects these beautiful shapes onto the roof, and you can change the top so you get different, rotates around, and so that's relaxing. And Peaceful Night is a nice essential oil formula. These are the ingredients, and all of these ingredients are safe for children. So you can diffuse them, keep the door a little bit ajar. You don't have to diffuse it all night. You can come in and turn it off after a couple hours. But even the ritual of putting it on and putting the drops in, kids are very good with rituals that prime their brains to know, okay, now it's time to go to sleep. Brushing teeth is part of the ritual, reading the book, and so this can be as well. And now you got to be really careful with essential oils and very young ones, but lavender is a very, very gentle essential oil. And if you dilute it enough, so in 1 whole tablespoon of some oil, whatever oil you like, jojoba oil, almond oil, and just 3 drops of lavender in there, and 8 drops of this is important, a 1% vanilla oil blend. So that means the vanilla oil is already blended in another oil. So it's a very low potency. 8 drops of that, and mix it into the carrier oils. It'll be very gentle. You can rub it on the chest to help with some relaxation if it's needed. I did, and I'm showing that book. I did read this book, Solve Your Child's Sleep Problems. Richard Ferber talks about like things that, how to change patterns and rituals and behaviors in kids. It's not talking about drugs or supplements or anything like that. I thought it was an amazing book. It was very eye-opening for me. So if you haven't read it, that is a book that I recommend for kids. And, I thought I was at the end. So yes, thank you so much for attending. I'm not done, of course. I'm going to take questions, but thank you. I've ended in good time despite the rocky start, which I apologize for. So what I'm going to do right now is